For 10 years, my world was defined by the scent of roasting turkey and the sound of laughter I wasn't a part of. My name is Clara, and for a decade, I was the perfect wife to Mark, a man born into a family that measured worth in stock portfolios and last names. My last name, Miller, was as plain as the worn-out apron I wore every Thanksgiving. Mark's family, the Caldwells, were an institution in our city. Their Thanksgiving dinner was the stuff of local legend, a grand affair in their sprawling, mahogany-filled dining room, a room I had only ever seen from the doorway. My role in this tradition was simple and brutally clear. I was to be the chef. Not the hostess, not a guest, but the hired help who just happened to be married to their son. Every year, it was the same ritual. I would spend 2 days preparing a feast fit for royalty. I'd brine the turkey, peel a mountain of potatoes, bake my grandmother's famous pecan pie from scratch, and arrange everything on the finest silver platters. And every year, just as the guests began to arrive, Mark's mother, Eleanor, would glide into the kitchen, her pearls clicking softly. She'd inspect my work with a critical eye, offer a tight, condescending smile, and say the words that had become the bars of my cage. "Thank you, dear. We'll call you if we need anything else. Your plate is on the counter." My plate. A solitary setting at the small, butcher-block island in the center of the cavernous kitchen, while 20 feet away, the family I had tried so desperately to join would toast and laugh and live a life I was only allowed to cater. I ate alone, surrounded by the mess I had made and the warmth of the ovens, a stark contrast to the cold shoulder I received from everyone but my husband. Mark. He was my reason for enduring it. In the quiet of our home, he was kind and loving. He'd hold me and apologize for his mother, for his family's old-fashioned ways. He'd promise me, "Next year will be different, Clara. I'll make them see. They just need time to get to know the real you." And I, a woman who had given up her own dreams of opening a small bakery to support his law career, believed him. I sacrificed my own family holidays, my pride, my sense of self, all for the hope that one day, next year, would finally arrive. This year was supposed to be it. The 10th year. A decade of service. Mark had sworn on our anniversary that this was the year he would put his foot down. He told me he had spoken to his mother, that an official place was being set for me at the main table. I allowed myself to feel a flicker of hope, a dangerous, fragile thing. I bought a new dress, a simple but elegant deep green velvet that I thought would finally make me look like I belonged. That Thanksgiving morning, I worked with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I hummed as I basted the turkey. I imagined the conversations I would have, the feeling of sitting in one of those high-backed chairs, a Caldwell at last. Around 3 o'clock, just as I was putting the finishing touches on the gravy, the swinging door to the dining room creaked open. I turned, expecting to see Mark coming to tell me it was time. Instead, it was Eleanor. She was holding a single, empty plate. My heart sank. She glided towards me, her face a mask of polite indifference. "Everything smells divine, dear," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I was just coming to get your plate ready." I stared at her, then at the plate in her hand, my entire body going cold. "Mark said, he said there was a place for me at the table this year," I whispered, my voice trembling. Eleanor let out a soft, pitying laugh. It wasn't loud, but it echoed in the kitchen like a gunshot. "Oh, bless your heart," she said, placing the plate on the butcher block island, right in its usual spot. "Mark says a lot of things, but we have important guests today. Judge Albright and his wife. We simply can't risk any awkwardness. You understand." She didn't wait for an answer. As she turned to leave, the door swung open again and Mark walked in, looking flustered. He saw his mother, saw the plate on the island, saw the devastation on my face. "Mom, I told you," he started, his voice weak. Eleanor turned to him, her gaze like ice. "Don't be ridiculous, Mark. Clara is perfectly happy where she is. She's so good at what she does back here." She looked from him to me, a silent command passing between mother and son. I looked at my husband, my partner, the man I had given up everything for, and I pleaded with my eyes. "Please, fight for me. Just this once." He met my gaze for a second, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before it was extinguished. He looked down at his shoes. "Clara, honey," he mumbled, not looking at me. "Maybe it's for the best. Just for this year. We don't want to make a scene. A scene. 10 years of my life. 10 years of silent humiliation, and he was worried about making a scene. The sounds from the dining room, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the first notes of a joyful toast, faded into a dull roar in my ears. The rich smell of the food I had so lovingly prepared suddenly turned my stomach. In that moment, surrounded by the fruits of my labor, I had never felt more starved, more empty. He hadn't just allowed them to push me aside. He had helped them do it. The betrayal was so absolute, so profound. It felt like a physical blow. I looked from his averted eyes to his mother's triumphant smirk, and I knew. Next year was never coming. In that moment, my world just fell away. It was the most profound pain I'd ever felt. If you've ever been through a major disappointment and you know what a broken heart feels like, please like this video so I know I'm not alone on this journey. I don't remember walking out. I just remember the cold blast of November air hitting my face, a welcome shock that snapped me out of my trance. I left the velvet dress, the years of hope, and the smell of turkey behind me. I drove until the city lights were a faint glow in my rearview mirror and ended up in a dingy motel room with peeling wallpaper and a single, flickering fluorescent light. That night, I didn't cry. I was hollowed out, a vessel scoured clean by pain. The days that followed were a blur of gray. I found a tiny, one-room apartment in the oldest part of town, with pipes that groaned and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. This was my new life. Mark called, of course, hundreds of times. He left pleading voicemails, talking about misunderstandings, about his mother's influence, about how much he loved me. I never picked up. His love was conditional, and the condition was my silence, my invisibility. I had spent a decade shrinking myself to fit into his world. Now, in my empty apartment, I felt like I had shrunk to nothing at all. I had no job, very little money, and a network of friends I had let wither while I tended to the Caldwell's social garden. I was utterly and completely alone. For weeks, I barely ate. The thought of food, of cooking, was nauseating. It was tainted by the memory of that kitchen, of that single plate on the island. My life had revolved around nourishing others, and now I had forgotten how to nourish myself. I survived on instant coffee and toast, the taste of ash in my mouth. My reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror was a stranger, a pale, gaunt woman with haunted eyes. This was the bottom. This was the empty, silent aftermath of a life detonated by a single, quiet act of betrayal. I thought my story was over. I was just the discarded wife, the footnote in the grand Caldwell family history. One particularly bleak afternoon, while rummaging through the last of my boxes for a blanket, my fingers brushed against something hard and leather-bound. I pulled it out. It was my grandmother's recipe book. I hadn't looked at it in years. It was a thick, worn-out journal, the leather cracked with age, the pages yellowed and stained with fingerprints and ancient spills of vanilla and butter. My grandmother, Nana Rose, was the antithesis of the Caldwells. She was warm and loud, and her love was as abundant as the flour she constantly dusted on her apron. Her kitchen was tiny, but it was the biggest room in the world. It was a place of welcome, a place where everyone had a seat. As I opened the book, a faint scent of cinnamon and cloves wafted up, and it was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. Her handwriting was a familiar, looping cursive. Next to each recipe for bread, or stew, or pie, she had written little notes. For a rainy day, next to her beef barley soup. To mend a broken heart, beside her recipe for dark chocolate fudge cake. This one tastes like sunshine, scribbled next to her lemon and lavender scones. These weren't just instructions on how to combine ingredients. They were prescriptions for the soul. They were stories. They were love, distilled onto a page. I sat on the cold floor, my fingers tracing her words, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than pain. It was a flicker, a tiny, fragile spark in the vast darkness. It was a memory of who I was before I became Mrs. Mark Caldwell. I was Clara Miller, Nana Rose's granddaughter. I was a woman who knew that the simple act of baking bread could be a form of prayer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the 24-hour grocery store and, with the last of my cash, I bought flour, yeast, salt, and butter. In my tiny, inadequate kitchen, I found a bowl and I started to work. I followed Nana Rose's instructions for her simple country loaf. I kneaded the dough on my small countertop, the repetitive motion a strange comfort. I pushed and folded, channeling all my anger, my grief, my loneliness into the dough under my hands. I felt its life, its resistance, its eventual surrender into a smooth, elastic ball. As it baked, a smell filled my small apartment. Not the complicated, pretentious scent of a Thanksgiving feast, but the honest, life-affirming smell of bread. When it came out of the oven, golden and perfect, I broke off a piece. The steam warmed my face, and as I tasted it, the crust crackling, the inside soft and warm, I cried. I wept for the woman I had been, for the love I had lost, and for the simple, profound goodness I had forgotten existed. It wasn't just bread. It was hope. It was a secret passed down from my grandmother, a reminder that I came from a lineage of strong women who knew how to create something beautiful and sustaining out of the simplest ingredients. In the quiet of my kitchen, I ate alone. But for the first time, I didn't feel lonely. I felt like I was home. That single loaf of bread changed everything. The next day, I baked 2 more. Then I moved on to the lemon and lavender scones that tasted like sunshine. I followed every note, every scribble in Nana Rose's book, and with each dish, a little more of my old self started to return. The apartment was constantly filled with the scent of baking, a warm, fragrant armor against the cold world outside. But aromas don't pay rent. My savings were gone. Desperation became my new fuel. I took the last of the scones, packaged them in simple brown paper bags, and went to the local farmer's market. I felt foolish and exposed, setting up a tiny card table between a woman with a mountain of organic kale and a man selling artisanal honey. My offering felt so small, so insignificant. For the first hour, people walked right past me. Their eyes would skim over my humble display and move on. The old voice of Eleanor Caldwell echoed in my head, whispering about how simple, how common I was. I was just about to pack up, my cheeks burning with shame, when a small, elderly woman with kind eyes stopped at my table. She picked up a scone, examining it closely. "Lemon and lavender?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, unable to speak. She bought one. I watched her walk away, expecting that to be the end of it. But 10 minutes later, she was back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Young lady," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My mother, she used to make scones just like this. When I was a little girl, and I was sick, she would bake them for me. I haven't tasted anything like this in 60 years. She reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thank you. You gave me back a piece of my mother today." She bought the rest of my scones. I stood there, long after she had gone, clutching the crumpled bills in my hand, but it wasn't about the money. It was about her words. "You gave me back a piece of my mother." I wasn't just selling baked goods. I was selling memories. I was selling comfort. I was selling the very thing I had been denied for a decade, a taste of genuine, unconditional love. That day was my first real victory. I went back to the market the next week, and the week after that. I started to build a small following of regulars. They didn't just buy my bread and pastries, they talked to me. They told me their stories. A young man bought my chocolate cake to apologize to his girlfriend. A new mother, exhausted and overwhelmed, bought a dozen of my oatmeal cookies because they reminded her of home. My little table became a confessional, a place of connection. I named my little venture Nana's Table, in honor of the woman who had given me the tools to save myself. I worked relentlessly. My days started at 3 a.m., my hands constantly covered in flour. I hauled bags of ingredients up 3 flights of stairs to my tiny apartment. I burned batches. I had days where I sold almost nothing. I cried from sheer exhaustion. But this struggle was different. It was mine. Every scone sold, every loaf of bread that brought a smile to someone's face, was a brick I was laying in the foundation of my new life. The word started to spread. A local food blogger wrote a small piece about the woman at the market with a soulful baking. My lines started getting longer. Soon, I was selling out within the first 2 hours. I started taking special orders, catering small parties. My one-room apartment became a full-time bakery, with cooling racks covering every available surface. It was chaos, but it was beautiful, creative chaos. The turning point came when I was asked to cater the annual fundraiser for the city's art museum, a high-profile event. It was a terrifying leap, but I knew I had to take it. For 2 weeks, I barely slept, planning and baking a dessert buffet that showcased everything I had learned from Nana Rose's book. The night of the event, as I stood discreetly in the corner of the grand hall, watching people's faces light up as they tasted my creations, I felt a sense of pride that was so profound, it almost brought me to my knees. I wasn't hiding in the kitchen. I was the architect of this joy. People were seeking me out, shaking my hand, asking about Nana's table. I was no longer an invisible woman. I had a name, and it was my own. It was right there with my own 2 hands that I started to rewrite my story. I stopped being the victim and became the author of my own destiny. If my journey of overcoming is inspiring you, please subscribe to the channel to follow the next chapters and become part of this community of new beginnings. A year passed. Nana's table was no longer just a market stall. I had saved enough to lease a small storefront, a cozy little bakery, and cafe on a sun-drenched street. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. The walls were a warm yellow, the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and fresh coffee, and most importantly, the tables were always full of people talking, laughing, and connecting. I had a small, dedicated staff. I had a community. I had a life that was rich and full and entirely of my own making. I hadn't heard from the Caldwells since that last, terrible Thanksgiving. They were a part of a past so distant it felt like it had happened to someone else. And then, one crisp autumn afternoon, the little bell above my shop door chimed. I looked up from the counter, a smile ready for a customer, and it froze on my face. It was Mark. He looked older, tired. He stood there awkwardly in his expensive suit, looking completely out of place in my warm, flower-dusted world. "Clara," he said, his voice hesitant. "Your place it's incredible." I just nodded, wiping my hands on my apron, the same simple gesture I'd made 1,000 times in his mother's kitchen, but now it felt different. It was a gesture of work, of pride. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice even and calm. There was no anger left, just a vast, quiet distance. "I miss you," he said, taking a step forward. "I made a terrible mistake. My mother, she's been difficult, but I'm not afraid of her anymore. I want you back." He told me that my bakery had become the talk of the town, that his colleagues and clients raved about it. He told me his mother was hosting Thanksgiving again this year, and that she had personally requested that I come. That a place was set for me, a real place, at the head of the table, next to her. The invitation, the validation I had once craved more than anything, was finally being offered. And I felt nothing. A ghost of my former self might have wept with relief, but that woman was long gone. The irony was almost laughable. They hadn't wanted Clara Miller, the loving wife. They wanted Clara Miller, the celebrated owner of Nana's table. My success had made me acceptable. I looked at Mark, at the desperation in his eyes, and I saw a man who hadn't changed at all. He wasn't here because he respected me. He was here because my newfound status reflected well on him. He wasn't inviting me home. He was trying to acquire a successful brand. "Thank you for the offer, Mark," I said, and my voice didn't waver. It's funny. For 10 years, all I ever wanted was a seat at that table. I thought it was the most important table in the world. I gestured around my bustling cafe, at the strangers sharing stories over my food, at my young baker laughing as she frosted a cake, at the warm, golden light pouring through the windows. But I was wrong. This is the most important table. The one I built myself. He started to protest, to make more promises, but I held up my hand.
"No, Mark.
I'm not the woman you left in that kitchen. That woman was willing to starve for a few crumbs of approval. I'm not anymore. I learned how to feed myself." I walked him to the door. As he stood on the sidewalk, about to leave, his mother's car, a sleek black sedan, pulled up to the curb. Eleanor rolled down the window. She looked at me, then at my shop, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "Clara," she said, her voice strained with a civility that was clearly costing her. "I hope you'll be joining us for Thanksgiving." I gave her a small, genuine smile. For the first time, I felt not anger or pain, but a kind of pity for her. Her world was so small, her table so exclusive, it had no room for real love. "Thank you for the invitation, Eleanor," I said. But I'm hosting my own Thanksgiving this year. Here. For my friends and my family. Her eyes narrowed slightly, confused. But you have no family here. I looked past her, into my warm, bright cafe, filled with the family I had chosen. That's where you're wrong, I said softly, and I closed the door. My Thanksgiving was everything there's never was. We squeezed extra chairs around the mismatched tables. We ate off chipped plates. There was loud music and spilled wine and uncontrollable laughter. My staff, my loyal customers, the old woman who loved my scones, they were all there. We weren't bound by blood, but by kindness and shared stories. As I sat at the head of my own table, surrounded by love that was real and freely given, I finally understood. My legacy wasn't in marrying into the right family. It was in the bread I baked, in the community I nurtured, in the safe harbor I had built from the wreckage of my past. My peace wasn't found in their acceptance, but in my own. I had learned that you can't wait for a seat to be offered at someone else's table. Sometimes you have to have the courage to build your own. Today, I understand that the wounds of the past don't define who we are, but what we do with them does. I am so grateful that you've listened to my story this far. If it touched you, please share it with someone who might need a little light and leave a comment with a word of strength and hope. Together, we are stronger.